Today, in our Now and Zen episode, we have the one, the only, Richie Greene from Portland. He's got a metallophone, harpsichord, and an insane isomorphic keyboard he's built himself. He's a theater wizard and speech-to-music translator extraordinaire, among many other things. Richie, welcome to the podcast. It's so nice to have you on.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's been an honor to be invited, and yeah, I'm thrilled.
I think we've talked about this a little bit in years past, but I would love to know how you came to be interested in microtonality initially, and then we can talk more, I think, maybe about your individual adventures and the paths you've decided to go down and what led you to those paths.
Yeah, in so many senses, I feel as though what invited me into this very vast area, like microtonality being an enormous umbrella covering so many things, and through the process I've gotten to learn so many different facets that I never really anticipated, especially like Macomb, which I'm really interested in now, but otherwise never thought. I found my way into this field through really an interest in spectralism, which, as you say, the speech-to-text kind of, I like to use the term now phonorealism, as it's not my term, right? It's, oh gosh, now I'm spacing on his name. Very famous for having the talking piano effect. Came up with the term phonorealism. Yeah, Peter Ablinger, very fascinating, created this talking piano, which is kind of a not prepared piano, but prepared with mechanisms, kind of like a player piano, but a really high-tech one, and fed spectral information into it, and it's trying to round off tones that it receives. The end effect is that we can kind of parse and identify text from a single piano. I think that process really inspired me. It was the kind of wake-up call of like, oh wow, there's so many other aspects in the musical making process that I haven't been considering in my own musical compositions. Still a kind of dream of mine is how do I blend those worlds more while I've created some examples where I, render a spectral analysis of a human speaking and then approximate those pitches with recording myself playing the violin hundreds of times. And you kind of have that similar effect. Now it's just different than Peter Ablinger's talking piano. It's hundreds of strings that sound like a talking voice. I would love to blend those worlds, make it like a phonosurrealism or something, and have this like aspect where we can hear timbre and the shaping of formants in voice in a musical chord. I think, especially for me, in a like acoustic performed musical chord. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be really revolutionary. And I don't know a lot more of the history. I do know that this is kind of a pop culture phenomenon in a small sense. I think of those YouTube videos where people take the text from the B movie and they put it into the MIDI piano roll. If you know what the text is, you kind of fill in the blank and hear it. And I had a crazy idea just now. I don't know if you've seen the trend online where there's a bottle and then a piece of paper falls on it and it has one face, and then next it has 12 faces, and then it has 48. And then so they keep increasing the faces until it looks like a real cloth instead of just a giant square dropping on it. They should do that with pitches per octave and a player piano, MIDI talking,
yeah,
right?
Right. Like what level of resolution do we need to have that perception kind of phenomenon? Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of resolution needed because you can recognize it with the 12-tone piano, but I think I have seen versions where people have used higher number of tones per octave and it's always better with more. My big question to you is if you're trying to get something that sounds like text and a chord. I always think of what you're doing, translating text into sound that somehow sounds like speech, that it seems ultra precise. So I wonder, how precise is it? Does it have to be a completely isolated studio recording in order to work? Is it possible live?
Yeah.
Like, what's the situation there?
Yeah, absolutely been considering these parameters. Like they're vast. I think a huge factor is timbre. And this goes into now more recently with, as I'll talk about some synths later on, so if we're looking at something like an isoharmonic structure, using sine waves will identify this virtual fundamental not to the harmonic series, but to like a isoharmonic series, will be more readily present if sine waves, right? In the back, I have the theremin there too. So I've been considering like multi-tracking theremin and using sine waves to create these harmonic partials of a human voice or whatever the realism is trying to emulate. And recognize, and I think shared with you an example of like violins, it's really harsh. It's intense. The example that I shared was a friend of mine, Sam, a local person in town, and I want to, if I remember it right, this was years ago now, want to say 2017 or 18, and he said, and this woman's voice, this beautiful voice, when you hear it rendered through hundreds of violins, you have, in addition, this like new distortion of all of the timbre baggage that they carry.
And then this woman's voice, this beautiful voice.
If it was tons of sine waves, it would sound extremely precise. And I think this like phenomenon of us questioning like, oh, we can only perceive it when we have the text underneath. I think that that's not totally true. That text is helping us listen to the virtual fundamental phenomenon, though it becomes an orchestration issue, certainly. Like, would tons of flutes work better, which are more sine wavy? I think, something that the player pianos do, where it's kind of like an airbrush, right? It's like spitting out tons of notes, so it's splattering to render this image where the strings are connected lines, where I'm trying to actually play this harmonic and follow it through, harmonic which is wavering in pitch, and then the next one, so on. So many different factors. I think really what I've learned throughout that process is not the necessity of like high resolution microtonality, but it is actually extremely precise dynamic. If we're off in pitch, it sounds like a slightly robotic timbre, or if we're off in loudness, it's a new formant altogether, a new vowel. It no longer sounds like the term, which that's such a mess to try to keep in. But part of it.
Yeah, it's really difficult, I think, maybe to get that precise in a live situation. And it's also good to speculate about which instruments potentially have sort of the least timbre baggage, I suppose. Are there different makeups for consonants and vowels when you are translating speech into, really complex, quick combinations of musical notes that sound like it?
Yeah. So I've been really taking advantage of the phenomenon called spectral bleeding, I think is the correct term, where when rendering, I'm usually using the program Spear, or at least recently have been, which is awesome. It's not open source, but it is freeware, and one of these things that, feels a little ancient using it, but it's awesome. And consonants will bleed into vowels. We'll, looking at kind of the FFT analysis, we'll see sudden moments of loudness in a harmonic that isn't necessarily there. It's just kind of part of the phenomenon. It's bleeding into it. So far that's been okay, and I think it's usually, I think, in these programs like something to be weeded out. However, now I'm like really embracing it, and also trying to incorporate like playing noise. Like one musician in this ensemble, where recently it's been myself overdubbed so many times, I'll just overbow and play something that covers the entire harmonic spectrum, and that becomes, the ts or k or whatever consonant kind of sound.
So for consonants, you can play things that are noisy instead of saying to yourself, I have to play these random frequencies to generate the illusion of noise.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, such a beautiful thing to consider a new form of orchestration where we assign select instruments. Maybe they are more sine wave or maybe more just agile in pitch for strings. And then percussion can play consonances. And I think it becomes this like fun interaction in a musical setting. Certainly something that helps is slowing things down tremendously. And I want to kind of reel back a little. I'm not necessarily aiming for fidelity or super high resolution. I don't want to be and devote my life towards being a extreme realist person. Like it's how do we, but gosh, would I love to like tap into the raw musical and just kind of perceptual aspect of like, you know, a whisper or a cry evokes this feeling that is different than how we hear some tonal music, depending on whatever the genre. But that how to bridge those worlds a little bit so we can like have moments, I think especially in like an ambient setting, that can allude to this feeling and sensation. But
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you imagine that sort of discipline going in the next 50 years?
I personally really dream of having, you know, this is knock on woods or whatever, in the future of like grant writing process. I need funding.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we all need funding, but
Oh my goodness.
I think, you know, to create this in real life, in a room, which I think would be an awesome experience, right? To hear live performers perform something that sounds like a voice whispering or speaking to them or singing something. You would need every musician with probably a mic that doesn't necessarily need to be going through a loudspeaker, but will help them register how loud they are. So something like a iPad or, you know, some sort of screen which has their sheet music and lets them know how loud they are and lets them know how loud they ought to be, so they can kind of really be precise in dynamic. So once we have that, I think the simplest kind of experiment would be holding a tone, like the realism portrait that they're trying to like depict would be a person holding a tone and then changing vowels on it. So just like ooh, wah, wah, whatever. Then it's just the practice of, okay, great, we have that harmonic and everyone's assigned to a different harmonic, and now we're just changing dynamics, and it's how precise can we be in our loudness, and then feel out, okay, did we actually perceive that? The outsider has to like kind of tell whoever's conducting them. But yeah, that's small steps, I think, for right now. 50 years from now, I would love to see it happen. It is really difficult. This is like something that I think maybe it's best that Ben Jonson didn't try to get into this or something like it. It takes another lifetime of attempts. But.
Oh yeah, this is definitely on the level of lots of things. From New Complexity, the display or device you mentioned to have them help monitor how loud they are reminds me of descriptions of microtonalists who are on fretless instruments using a tuner to help them figure out where they are in, the wilderness of fretless land, which can be extremely difficult.
Totally. Which, I mean, like, non-microtonalists use tuners too. Arguably, tuners were made for non-microtonalists. This is...
It looks like it, yeah.
It is a thing where I think a digital interface will help musicians practice a new form of listening, which is, we've had an extremely vague form of dynamic notation in the last several hundred years. The spectrum of how many P's to how many F's, like... where now we're actually needing to, and each different musician has to be on a different amplitude there. I don't know. I don't know if there are people who have, I've tried to research it, and maybe you would know more, but like, as I think you have absolute pitch, are there people who have absolute decibel or, an equivalent in that sense?
Oh my goodness. I've never heard of that, but there's definitely some people who are better at it. For anyone who's listening, things are uneven all over the place in ways that are strange. So like the way we hear frequencies, we'll hear frequencies at 4K a lot louder than other ones, and it's almost like the big one. And then the low and high ends attenuate, so lots of mixes could compensate for that by using the smiley face curve, where like lows and highs are more pronounced, so you get more of that. Things like that. Those, are your Fletcher-Munson curves, and there's a million other things like that. It's great. There's a million psychoacoustic tricks, so, you can always use those in your music. I was wondering how you got into 41 tone equal temperament, because I gather that is your tuning of choice, and I also observed that it's maybe a little bit of a Portland thing because of, the kite guitar coming out of there and that sort of thing, so totally. I'd love to hear you speak about that.
Yeah, for full transparency, I live maybe a 4-minute bike ride away from Kite's house. So that is, wow. I'm in far southeast Portland, and as I started to get more into this, I was playing in a band named Mindparade with Timmy Barnett. GNU Linux Loves All is his project, who I know Stephen knows personally from a long time ago. I think you guys met way back when.
We were in grad school together.
Yeah, totally. So it was, while I was already practicing some of this, I actually kind of explored some phonorealism in that band too, which was pretty fun and funny. But having these conversations with Timmy, who's an excellent violinist, and he was starting to become more and more fascinated at that time. This would have been, I want to say, 2019, maybe 18. And yeah, conversation, community. He was spending more time with Kite community. As I started to get to know Kite a little bit more, I was really drawn to what I thought was really just spectralism, but then it became, I wanted small grain size for melody, where really with this conversation that we've already had, I'm not needing 311 equal temperament kind of thing to have for its vertical accuracy. I wanted something more that could depict bending and changing pitches, kind of breaking apart a glissando into as many steps as possible. When I learned of the Kite guitar, that we could have a fretted system, it just kind of appealed to that practice. And I wasn't, maybe I was a little naive then too, but I've gotten to know and have a mixed relationship with it. While it's somewhat my home system, because I have acoustic instruments in it now, yeah, it is what it is. I'm grateful to get to know it better. With the synths, I get to explore other things too. So that's the power of the digital tuning. But yeah, I committed myself to the tuning system to some degree by building this metallophone, which is, yeah.
It's so very valid for acoustic instruments because, of course, everyone wants to play in a group and use the same tuning. And you really could spend a lifetime exploring, I think, any sufficiently large tuning, even one of the small ones. So, 41 is just going to keep you busy with lots of interesting stuff forever.
I enjoy the size of it. It's far, each step scent-wise is way large enough to notice, that approximation. and yet its accuracy does a pretty good job at so many different things. I know I myself have this, and I see it in, I think, especially a lot of younger individuals who join the, I don't know, I'll say, xenharmonic alliance, tuning community at large, have this like, oh, I need to find my own system. I will say there's a huge power to finding a system that has existing community in it, while like we're up against, if we want to see it as a battle, which I don't, but up against 12 equal is like, that's a lot of people in that. And I think to practically have like and participate in an existing community of individuals with instruments, and the likelihood of bands, or at least friends who know what you're thinking about, that you get to have conversations, is psychologically healthy. I think. Yes. It's fun to at least like, share my scores with Timmy, and then for him, I think this was like literally a week or so ago, he like looks at this score, which to so many of my friends would be like cringing. He's like, oh, this is great, and this is notation that I just read. and just to have this shared language is really awesome. Yeah.
You can get used to microtonal notation and microtonal sounds, and that is totally a thing, and I feel like there's too many people who feel like it can't be done, yet who have simultaneously experienced evidence that they can learn it.
Yeah.
Almost in real time, perhaps in front of my eyes, whenever I might introduce it to them. But it is great to have that lingua franca. And 41, of course, is also a tuning system that lends itself particularly well to like normal Western music notation with the 5-line staff. The way you've created your, I'm not sure what you would call it. There's a keyboard instrument you've created that uses 41 tones per octave, right? An isomorphic keyboard. It reminds me of It reminds me of Aaron Hunt's tonal plexus because of having 41 and then multiplying it, I think, what is it, by 5? I should know this. 41 times 5, is that 205? It is. Yeah, 41 times 5, and it's also like a good upper bound for tuning that's practical for humans to harmonize with and know whether you're a pitch class off or not, because like if you get high enough, like maybe past 55 or past 60, you start to maybe not know like which one you're on, but 41 is just really nice because it's right at that upper bound. So it's great.
Yeah. I will say for the synth, which at any point we can switch to looking at that, it is both isomorphic and color layouts can change. So I use a slide on snap-on keycaps, so it could be, set to a 31 bass or whatever we want to. I think just because I have fixed-pitched instruments, acoustic instruments in 41 equal, I generally just leave it in that. And it takes a lot of time to swap it out, but yeah, it's fun, and yeah, it's helpful, easy template to have, and for me to just like do the computer retuning, set it to some other, be it a JI scale. Well, yeah, I'll say generally a JI scale for me, and just leave it as a 41 note layout. I know where I am at any point, and I just remember like, oh, down C is now this or that. And yeah.
Right, exactly. I guess I would love to inquire a little bit about some of the music from 6 Monologues. So that was a performance at Long Drive Theater, right? And did you write the compositions?
Yeah, so Long Drive Theater is a project that my partner Caitlin and Petrick and myself kind of assembled during the pandemic. It was really the reason, or I'll say catalyst, that I built this instrument. I was already fully down the rabbit hole of microtonality and have been a practicing, generally acoustic music composer, and wanted to make that more apparent and also in some senses just less difficult. I'm a violinist and violist, and as well as many of my friends are too, having something that we can just hit and say, that's the right pitch. Thinking of it, I think it really was catalyzed by this. How can we have a, rehearsal instrument, kind of piano accompanist style rehearsal process. So that was, 2019 going into 2020. Oh no, I think it was 2020 going into 2021. We were already in the pandemic and was considering building this layout. I eventually I started to organize things on my computer and measure out like how large would this be, what would that take, how many octaves would I actually practically want, and would it take up my entire living room, you know? Like if I were to have gone an octave lower and made like a dense vibraphone, that would be huge, but it would be awesome. Don't get me wrong. It's just a commitment to have an instrument like that. And eventually made the plunge. I think I ordered, 60 feet of raw aluminum bar to my house and went to Harbor Freight and got a cheap metal cut saw and chopped it up, tuned it. I will say, I was reminiscing prior to this interview earlier today. I was this was several years ago now, I was binging Now and Zen during the making process, and I'm not like lying at all. I like distinctly remember this is the Metallophone here. Maybe I'll just do that. I'm gonna pick this up and demonstrate it there.
Oh yes, three octaves.
We've got 3 octaves, yes, from C5 up to C8, so it's very high.
Yeah.
I'll stand up. Let me get that camera rolling too. Give me just 1 second. So I am stacking things, and we'll let you see this here also.
Yeah.
Stacking things in 4 different kind of staircase towers, as the normal vibraphone is 2, where, chromatically offset. We're needing much more. It's a funny layout, and I chose not to have the kind of isomorphic layout 441 for like the physical to go easy on the frame of it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wood bars running across, and I wanted the weight to be evenly distributed across the instrument. And yeah, so it's kind of resulted in how do I put like as many, so you can see here, as many bars evenly across. So there's all of these running and so on and so forth. But it's a funny, it has its quirks. Kind of looks like a crooked teeth at times, but it's my charming microtonal glockenspiel of sorts that I call the Metallophone. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So then an isomorphic layout would put more stress on the frame because there would be more rows. Is that correct?
There wouldn't be more rows, but I think there would be more bars on certain rows than others. And it would be like front heavy in this sense, right?
Oh, I see. Like if you cram all of the effective black keys into just these spaces where they all normally live, but just have the white keys as little islands, that would just be Yeah, and gray and so on. So I fully hand built this, cutting wood and cutting metal. The only thing that I did do professionally was eventually once the bars were tuned, sent them to be anodized. So now they are colored and sealed so the aluminum doesn't rust on me, which is great. But, so lap back around, that was made in a hurry. I think I made the entire instrument in like maybe a month or a month and a half tops, which I'm pleased with. It was a lot of work. Cutting metal, for anyone listening, is tricky. If I were to do this again, I'd probably invest in thicker metal because I'm pleased with how it came out, and it'd be awesome to have a longer ring, or I could think about resonator tubes, but that would be a mess of tubes. And I would definitely get a better saw. My gosh, I had like just bruises across my body from like putting my full body into this little chop saw, and oh my goodness.
But yeah, it was really fun. I think my neighbors probably hated me during that period because it was just like having to cut and drill into metal, and then hot metal shards are flying around burning like the house and parts.
When you were making the instrument, was the deadline to the show there and you were making the instrument as you were approaching the deadline?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Classic.
Uh-huh.
Using the project Long Drive Theater and Caitlin having written the dialogue to, or monologues of 6 monologues, which are 6 different monologues. I really fully in 41 equal. I think there are some moments that I would think of as JI because we have violinists playing and stuff. However, yeah, it was seeing that as my deadline of like, okay, we need to shoot this. We're filmed, we shot it, recorded it in, what was it, Pika's Annex Theater. Beautiful black box space theater. It was fun.
For those of you who haven't seen it, there are some videos. And I remember the one that I saw that really captured me was your ha-ha monologue, which also has some really interesting harmonic material that I'd love to ask you about.
I know that when I say ha-ha, it allows for a little more ha-ha to follow. I do this because it has worked before. What it was the ha had the ha-ha reach out to the ha-ha. Before I say anything else ha-ha, that is to be ha-ha, I just want to get from a-ha to b-ha without saying anything else. Ha-ha. Can there be anything else outside of the ha? Anything else to do? Ha, ha?
Like, from my perspective, what it sounds like is that you have the string players playing an essentially diatonic language, and then someone is bowing the 41 tone equal tempered metallophone on certain pitches that seem unrelated in the harmonic series in some way. Like, I almost want to say there was like a major chord and then bowing that had like a neutral third on it rubbing, or some other kind of sharp 9 thing going on. So what's the logic there? I'd love to know.
Yeah, trying to remember where I even was while writing that, because that was how many years ago now. Also, I remember, so we had Andy Rayborn playing bass clarinet and Kate Kilborn playing violin double stops almost exclusively throughout it. And then Caitlin bowing the metallophone as I recited a monologue while kind of dancing. All of them were living in, and I think I shared a score to you. However, I don't think it really depicts what Caitlin's actually playing there, as that became somewhat impromptu in the rehearsal process. We started to map out, like, how do we get the creative intentions and make them consistent? Also, like, recognize part of the kind of ethos of Long Drive Theater is having roles evenly dispersed across. It was, while I write music and Caitlin writes text, we wanted for that kind of depiction, we are also the camera people and lighting people. We're the musicians and we're the actors. None of us were trained actors in that process. So we're all approaching this from a very amateur place. And with Caitlin, whose background is more in dance and experimental dance, she's not a trained musician. And the idea of giving her any sheet music, yet alone microtonal sheet music, very demanding in a short turnaround time. So it was picking different pitch regions. Also, we have the limitation of, like, I can't bow all of the notes on this. I can only bow 24 notes per octave of the 41, because I can only bow the most outermost, not the landlocked ones, I like to say. So, yeah, it was, the violin was running in its own both time domain. I think I notated it evenly, so the bass clarinet and violin were in different meters, I'll say, and then giving Caitlin kind of aleatoric instructions of, like, count to this many amount of seconds, and then bow these two clusters, then count another, interval of time and bow these clusters. So then it became a bit more chance related. I think the general effect really sounds like this like feedback, kind of like, where's this random high squeaking tone coming from?
Okay, cool. All right, now I got it, because I was like trying to piece it together, and I was like, hold on a second. What's going on here?
Yeah, I think I had like early intentions of having a very specific something in mind, and I think being flexible in rehearsal and learning and performance. I'm actually like far more pleased with the end result than what I had actually written too, which is always a good lesson to recognize, like, being a little more laid back and flexible can sometimes be the best thing for the creative process. Both of ourselves and probably all of the listeners, we have this inherent meticulous nature because we're microtonalists. But to learn how to turn that on and off can be really helpful creatively.
Yeah, 100%. I would love to give the scoop to some of the listeners about these key signatures here. I love it. We've got 41 tet key signatures going on, right? The whole time, basically.
Yeah, I think that movement was really, I was thinking of that one as like I think simple 5-limit JI too. As you were saying, diatonic, it's probably like Zarlino kind of structure, or following a simple counterpoint between the strings or string player and bass clarinet. But yeah, throughout the entire collection of all 6 monologues.
In the third one, you have like an E flat major key signature, but all of the arrows are up, B flat, E flat, and A flat up. So that would mean like that the just major thirds are being used because they're smaller, and then the just minor thirds are slightly larger, and it works out pretty much perfectly. I think in that sense, except, you'd have the wolf between B flat up and F natural. So there's also some F ups in the score to account for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this was 2020, right? And 2021. I feel like my personal notation practice has probably changed a little bit now. Today I generally like to use, and I think we were speaking about this online more recently, I prefer to use like HEJI looking accidentals exclusively for JI now, and kind of caret up and down accidentals for EDOs that use ups and downs notation. I think in how I notated this score so many years ago, that wasn't the case. But because I do like to mix different instrumentation depicting different things, I think it becomes really clear and helpful to see if like, oh, this is notated with carets, it's on this instrument. If I'm hopping between instruments on a given score and kind of colliding these things, it can be somewhat helpful. However, I think my notation process at that time, I was... I don't know if generous is the right word. I was gung-ho, maybe. I was all in and embracing kind of the freaky nature of microtonal key signatures, accidentals. I was using HEJI accidentals in 41 of saying like, oh, if I'm depicting the 7th harmonic, then you can see that depicted with this HEJI accidental that corresponds with it. So then I think I even have it's probably the 6th movement where it starts off with 3 of us bowing the metallophone, or I think I'm bowing a musical saw and the other 3 members are bowing the metallophone. And I want to say that that's like, if I remember correctly, that was a 5-limit texture that then eventually I interrupt Caitlin's monologue by playing the metallophone.
Chord change. Meanwhile, there's some...
And then the key signature changes, and you can see it's like, oh, now we're in a 2-3-7 subgroup. And it's pretty clear because all of the accidentals have changed there.
I see, yes, it's like a Sharpie key where you have all the sharps in, but they're all 7 accidentals, and F C and G are like a double 7 accidental, so they're, it's starting on a septimal note, but then those 3 notes are a septimal comma down as well.
Exactly, yeah, so just down, down. Helpful as 41 approximates things in 2-3-7 subgroup really well, and is consistent with its own ups and downs notation too.
Yeah, absolutely. If I may ask, what prompted the idea for you to change from using accidentals with arrows attached to them to using sort of the more floating ones?
Well, it was really just I want it to be clear whether I'm writing in JI or in 41 or another EDO. And I think just making that distinction kind of typographically makes it pretty apparent. I think getting myself set up as I anticipate more and more of my music will be a collage of both of them simultaneously. It also can be helpful where it's like sometimes I do want the string players to play in unison with the bowed metallophone or something. So then I'll switch to kind of caret ups and down notations for them, and they'll know, oh, or I'll know if I'm reading that music too. Like, listen to them for that pitch versus listen to a locking double stop or something.
If you have those accidental arrows, they look like syntonic commas in hedging. Sometimes the symbols can help you determine what the tuning is and sometimes not. So I think whether or not one is concerned with that sort of overlap very much depends on your personal tuning practice, really.
Totally.
I will also say I will surrender my personal biases if I'm writing for a musician that says, hey, notate it for me like this.
Oh, yeah.
I'll always, yeah, like I'm not going to be that person so stubborn. So it's really right now, currently this combination of the carets, ups and downs for EDOs and kind of ligatured 5 limit or whatever, HEJI is what I'm currently using most, is working for me. Yeah, I think whatever works for the musician I'm writing for. I'm usually writing music for myself and then a few friends. And that's, I think, the nature of microtonality at large, generally. Maybe an orchestra commission will come up, but my relationship with those are like, microtonality is the last thing they want me to be bringing up in that context.
It's similar to how contemporary composers see themselves, is that the way that things are going is that people are writing smaller, more focused ensembles for their friends who have more capabilities than the orchestra. And because the orchestra is more competitive, it also just, makes sense. And microtonality would be part of that. It's just another reason for a potential competitor to not play your piece. So, you get into these situations where you want to write for people
Well, I'll share with you our last, or I should say most recent Long Drive Theater performance, which was Kate Kilborn, the same violinist, myself playing violin, and my friend Sam also playing violin, as well as a few other members in the theater aspect. And long story short, Long Drive Theater has been an awesome and fun creative outlet that I'm really grateful for Caitlin to have nudged me into this realm. It's really interesting. Never really anticipated the experimental theater aspect. And now that I'm like literally building instruments and doing experimental theater, it's like, is there something inherent about this pipeline of Harry Partch like connections that, while I've known of Partch's legacy for forever, kind of accidentally stumbled into it. I'm like, oh, this is what we're doing, right? A fully microtonal theater project and continuing to do it.
I think it is somewhat inherent. Yeah, I think you've stumbled onto something there. Absolutely. Would you care to give us a tour of some of the other instruments you've got? I'd love to see the
totally.
isomorphic keyboard.
Yeah. Let me get the cameras swapped. here this thing is. I've been calling it the xenachord, spelt XEN, of course. And it is compiled out of 4 AKM 320 MIDI controllers, which are a very affordable MIDI controller, which I've, I'll say like 4 MIDI controllers in a trench coat sort of thing. I've just put them together, stripped their keys off, and made new keys, which kind of correspond to it. Right now we have the other angle, which you can jump to. There we go, Rhodesy. So those probably all sound pretty off to you, or?
Oh, potentially, yeah. I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah.
So for the camera's sake, I'll demonstrate. I can slide keycaps off and swap them about. They kind of just snap in and out pretty nicely. So can fully change the layout of this thing. I'm generally just keeping it in 41 again. However, because the entire process is, 3D printed designs, I can make as many different colors as I want. It could be glow in the dark and so on. I was very inspired by, and I'm going to really poorly mispronounce his name, but George Vogel's instruments, which
Vogel?
Yeah, I think very similar in spirit, are multiple MIDI controllers with just a 3D printed interface over it. And at this time, I started making this probably maybe either before or just as Lumitone was launched. Lumitone's also personally out of my budget and wanted to include new instrumentation. I had been playing this metallophone, and as just a usually like concert or acoustic music composer, wanted to have new instruments part of our kind of ensemble. And this was a very, a process. It took me, as you've probably seen, the updates throughout it took me some time. I mean, I taught myself how to do 3D design to make this. And
Wow.
I'm really grateful. It's fun. I can play fun.
It's pretty
simple.
playable, yeah.
Yeah, it is small, and it is an extremely limited register, and that is part of it, right? Is part of the parameters, and I think I shared with you some like recent things. I've been trying to explore various like isoharmonic etudes for myself to learn on here. Exploring music that is such a limited register that sounds full in this sense of like and makes use for its small pitch sizes here, where having very small microtonal intervals that the effect creates these moving virtual fundamental bass lines, so I can kind of conceive of counterpoint of what is the bass line that I want to hear, what is one other melodic line, and then, okay, what necessitates the difference tones to kind of have that emerging bass tone.
So those etudes, they might only work with specific timbres then.
Yeah, and that's kind of part of the fun of it to some degree. Using basically just a simple Max MSP patch, I kind of render all of these 4 separate MIDI controllers into one device. And now I can use my mod wheels and pitch wheels and a sustain pedal to kind of unify them all together. So to play around with like a piece of music where the timbre can emphasize something, and then over the course of it, I can use my mod wheel and then change our ear's focal point to listen to this other thing, listen to your vertical harmony versus your kind of difference tone, bass tone.
With the snap caps, I'm really curious about the layout because you described the idea of being able to remove them and rearrange it, and that seems like a good compromise between something existing in the real world where like you change it that way and it's not just some blinking lights, but also like it not taking too long. Because like, with my keyboard that I've rearranged, it takes like half an hour to change it to another layout, basically. So this, it seems like it would be a lot faster, but not instantaneous. With the layouts that you have, do you have a 41 layout physically that exists without the snap keys, such that if you put snap keys on a different way, it's all just kind of like one system of rows that you could lay over? Or
this is in so many ways kind of cheap Lumitone without the LEDs, right? Fully, so could have, it's a 128 note isomorphic kind of controller that I can change to anything. So yeah, 4 kind of tiers going up, and can swap it to change the layouts fully. And then it's just a matter of how many different keycaps I want to print and keep with me of different colors, and but it's been fun. I think while this was like really a first prototype, and I'm really pleased with it, it's beautiful, and it works. I think this idea of modifying instruments has a lot of promise to it. I believe in that process of like, we have so many different companies making 12 equal controllers, and MIDI controllers are just, a box of buttons. And while I get that there's an art to the velocity, and I'm really just deliberately choosing the cheapest MIDI controller to throw under that trench coat, I think it's a fun experience. And it also ties me back to like this, microtonalists are instrument builders, as you've built and modified so many instruments. Like, for us to get these notes, like, we gotta give a little energy, and I like that relationship to it aesthetically and artistically. But
it very much becomes a sort of an intense physical labor of love, more than I think a lot of 12 equal musicians might have with their instruments.
We can hear differences, and nice to, I can see various similar colors playing the same notes. The entire process feels inviting and intuitive. I don't have the music with me now, but I was recently learning 5 limit versions of Tallis choral music, which was really fun. And then, like, how do I interpret it so I just, like, fully embrace every comma shift as it emerges? And that's just, like, so fun to start to have that study.
I love the process of musical translation. It's actually, I think it's very subjective because there's a lot of things that you can do. I'd love to know if there's any chords or any changes in there that made you decide that you have to use a wolf because of how many notes are used, or just how the diatonic scale works, or how much it's drifting.
I want to give benefit of the doubt that the downward drift at the end of a certain phrase was made deliberately to correct, or no, sorry, was it upward or downward now? No, it was an upward drift at the end of the phrase to kind of cater to what might have been an ensemble downward drift was my logic of like, maybe that was deliberate on his end, because it was like just at the end of the phrase, like you see this, like, it's, for me to be strict about it, it's going to have to drift upward. Maybe that is because choirs will naturally drift downward, and that kind of logic. But I mean, it's been a blast, really. I completed this instrument fall of 2023, And sadly, I haven't gotten to play too much of it. As you know, I've jumped into, I'm recently a graduate student getting an MA, and that's robbed me from getting to know this instrument as well as I'd like,
yes.
but that's also life. And now I'm integrating it into the whole graduate thesis things of how do I show off and get all of these instruments making a bunch of music together. So
wanted to maybe ask you about another instrument that I'm not sure if you have it here, but we were talking about it. In fact, I don't even know if it's a secret, but it's you're also working on a small, right, like 19?
yeah, no, I'm working on both. Here, I can kind of swivel this aside. Yeah, my different split key kind of Halberstadt layout, Cimbalo Chromatico is the kind of, which are Cimbalo Chromatico, right? Chromatic harpsichord is what it really will translate to. I think I've got this one plugged in. One second.
This is an extremely exciting instrument. Look at that. If you cannot see the screen, what Richie's holding up is a small MIDI controller that has split keys where the black keys are. The lower portion is kind of like a gray half key and the upper portion is a black key. And then there's also, oh, this is interesting. So you've got two there. So is one of them 17 tet and one of them 19 tet?
Exactly, or any 17-note scale and 19-note scale, because they're MIDI controllers, right? We can
Yes.
put them in.
And it's incredibly important that on the 19-tone controller for E sharp and B sharp, which like lie in between adjacent white keys, that you've made those keys smaller and brought them more to the inside, because if you make them look as big as standard black keys, it'll just look like a bunch of black keys. So this is very well organized hierarchically, and I've also noticed that this is part of the instrumental design of these sorts of like older instruments even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, with the 19 specifically. However, if we were to get the 17 and 19 on top of each other, it kind of becomes that Archicembalo, the Nicola Vincentino instrument, to have a 31-note approximation if you just have a couple of doubled notes there too. Cool, so that's working. Yeah, it is really fun. It's extremely simple. It was, as I was embarking in creating this, now I'm thinking of it as like, I call this xenachord, but maybe I'll call it more like the isomorphic xenachord, and maybe xenachord is just a big umbrella for my like kind of raw, dirty 3D modding process of this.
Yeah.
Enormous inspiration out of your process too, and a friend, as you know, Paul Johnson, helped me create one of these, split key keyboards, in the sense that you will do it, and recognizing, yes, as you do this, the keys, or the space is wider, right? Like,
Right.
You're no stranger to the difficulty of playing an octave in certain EDOs with
Yes.
one hand. So that is still very much the case. However, because these are mini MIDI keyboards, that is slightly reduced. I think if I were, and I really should, whenever time will fall in my lap, if I were to make a 15-note diatonic split key keyboard, which also has a history. Yeah, I think that 15-note one would be pretty much the size of a standard 12 equal keyboard, because of the compensation for the mini MIDI controller.
That's intriguing. Dimensionally, what I am seeing, of course, doesn't answer the question of maybe how the MIDI is lined up on the inside. So when you made these 17 and 19 tone controllers, were you using existing controllers and hijacking them, or did you create something with new dimensions?
Yeah, no, this is fully using the external, I'll show it to you too, but we've got the other camera here. External enclosure of the AKM, this side, AKM 320, so it's not my MIDI controller in any sense. Very easy mod, and I've deliberately left the back screws off so I can show you the inside.
Oh, yes. Let's get in there.
Very easy. So all I did was unscrew these back screws. You can see the little screw holes there. And it kind of opens up nicely like a book. I can leave the ribbon controls in, and I'm simply just replacing the keys. As they were in the 12 equal sense, they're unified, so I don't need to change individual keys. They're printed or injection molded on the original keyboard as these different groups. You unscrew those, pop these in, and then it works.
That's great.
Yeah, so it's just underneath here, all of the MIDI sensors kind of correspond. I kind of figured we could take one apart, if you like, do a sort of reverse.
I
really
love that.
excited. I plan to launch this, and maybe by the time this podcast is out, it'll already be available. But made these ultimately for myself, self-indulgently. I wanted more controllers, and for friends and musicians, as I have so many friends who are excellent piano players, and I really do think that something like a keyboard like this, where I can write and just say like, hey, this one's the sharp, this one's the flat, and not deal with any microtonal notation, and then they're good to go.
You can totally swing that with 19, yeah, and somewhat with 17, depending on how weird you are.
Yeah, but also it's like, again, with the story of, if a musician wants things notated some way, I can build a 41 or a 19 or 17 note subset of 41 or a JI scale or anything, and then still just notate it in this way that's inviting to them. And they have the muscle memory, they don't have to kind of extend that practice too much. And I really like that kind of inviting nature to it.
Yeah.
I also, it's like I can play keyboard and quickly like futz around on this, and that is really fun.
Oh, it's so inviting.
It brings it back to like there was a period where this was somewhat in vogue, right? It was a popular harpsichord, chromatic harpsichord layout for a reason, before it became super standardized to just make them in 12. Yeah.
Oh, so cool.
Kind of like this layout precedes 12 equal altogether is kind of fascinating to me. So
Yes.
finding approximations are easy ways that we can kind of return to that.
I just have one silly mathematical question, which might even be answered by us taking it apart. But I wonder, since it is a mini keyboard, how like the white keys that you've printed have to be slightly wider to fill
Exactly.
the gaps. Right, exactly. But because it's mini, it still works out to be 19. I'm wondering, like, geometrically how that shakes down, and where like a 19 tone mini octave ends up in comparison to a normal size 12th tat octave, like if it's slightly wider, or like 19/12ths of a thing. You could figure it out, but of course you
This
probably
was
know.
the thing I brought up with, if I were to make in this system a 15 note split key keyboard, it would feel like the standard piano dimensions, which I think is pretty cool. I'm currently trying to render this approximation while it's only working for a 32 note controller, which is this AKM 320. Trying to seek other mini MIDI controllers out there that have more notes. There is a microKORG, I think is the name, that is, I want to say 62 note. So if I could have, a bigger range, that would be awesome, and would love to get that working on this.
Oh, are you saying there's not a mini MIDI controller with 88 notes?
Yes, at
What?
least with velocity sensitivity.
That's the
Not
kicker right
one-
there.
Not one that I'm aware of. Yeah, so that's, if there was, I would definitely have it and be making it. Yeah, I mean, a benefit of this is that these AKMs are like $40 right now, so it's really affordable. I think as if you're like wanting to start to experiment with it, to think of like, 3D printing your own and throwing these in becomes a really inviting way. But
Absolutely. And one more question. For your 15 tone layout, how would you arrange the keys? I'm assuming it would be kind of like how they did it on older instruments and not with any kind of assumption of 15 tone equal temperament. But potentially it could feel nice to play.
Potentially it could, yeah. I mean, I would love, so I plan to make this a full open source project where sharing all of the print files and people can make and experiment it with their own. I think, as I'm still new to 3D design too, like certainly we can approximate things better or render these STL files much better. But how awesome would it be to just like have a sort of template where you can pick your layout and have it just render it immediately. So you could have the historical 15 note one, or you could have a 15 equal, more microtonal kind of layout, or experiment with 13 or whatever number in between and have it just generate files would be a cool dream. And I think a really inviting way for us to further explore this. But
yeah, that's wonderful. I think that's been the dream for a while, and you're doing the kinds of things that will incrementally get us closer and closer to making it happen.
hey, thanks. I think we're doing it, and I think you've been doing it for much longer and have been, as I can only say, the inspiration of yourself and of George Vogel and so many others of like built into the microtonal process is this makeshift DIY nature, and yeah, I think that that's real. Like we need to continue to practice it.
100%.
Yeah, I've got a little electric screwdriver here.
Woohoo! I'm so excited to look inside.
Yeah, so what's fun and why I think it's kind of worth exploring, hopefully this camera is capturing it a bit better and I can scoot this back.
Sure.
Maybe I just do something like this too. When installing it, so I'll do kind of reverse order installation. Let's give it a little timbre. If I over tighten a screw, it will hold the note down. So I like to leave this plugged in throughout the installation process. It's not rocket science, but you just kind of calibrate it in this sense. So, I want to try to deliberately over tighten it and see if I can like mess it up. Okay, I can't now, but I think if I were to fill every one of these screw holes with screws, which I could, it probably wouldn't sound the best. You don't need many to hold down pieces of plastic, but
Oh, you're saying that you don't put in all the screws for every single pressure pad.
yeah, so I'm using the same screws that came in the original instrument, and they actually have more slots than they even screw in their own device, which was odd itself.
That is odd.
But it gives me options as to where I want to screw these in. And I'll often play around. I probably don't spend more than like 5 minutes futzing around with like how to get everything, screwed in and looking fine and working. But yeah, you really just only need as many screws as will hold down pieces of plastic, and I keep it plugged in while I'm doing it, so I make sure there are no like notes that are hitting two sensors with one key or something like that. But got little ramekins to throw screws in. But yeah, what I love about this, where I've once been in the basement and changing the keys of kind of I don't know what we call it, but your style of split key keyboard, and that was for that one really difficult for me, and like individual keys, and took a lot of force. I like this one's takes a second, which is really nice. Something also that I would love to see is a modular system of this, where similar to my like keycap technique, if I could just like pull them on and off, that would be pretty interesting. They would be all different widths, but okay, so with this you can see that.
I can see the inside. Ah, yes.
Yeah, I took inspiration to the actual Project 31's Archie Cimballos when I saw photos of them building that, and I was like, oh, wait, we could totally do that with like existing, like in that sense, the strings on a harpsichord stay in the same place, and
Yeah.
the key just kind of creates this inner arm to reach that string. I'm just doing the same where the sensors stay in the same place, and now each key kind of reaches over to hit the assigned, sensor.
You can see, based on what you held up to, that the gray key is the lower one, since it's going upwards, right?
Yeah. So I can take these all apart too. They kind of slide into different. You print them all separately, and they can be 3 different colors of your choice, but
Oh,
they just, swivel together.
so they're attached to a spine as well, which is also not something I exactly expected, just because in my experience taking apart keyboards, I find that if you can just shuffle around each individual key, that's how I've been doing it as kind of like a hacked thing. But you've got,
Exactly.
this is like a Yamaha keyboard on the inside, where it's like you've got it all connected and it's pre-done.
But yeah, it basically I'm deconstructing the existing design and just changing the layout as I wanted to explore them. So
That's amazing. How does the velocity sensitivity feel on that controller?
I mean, it's a $40 MIDI controller. It
yeah.
is not famous for its velocity as it is. However, it is there, and more than anything, like on my DAW, I'll change velocity curves, and I also really like getting that information and using it for other things. Then velocity is like more fun than velocity itself, depending on the context. So yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I kind of enjoy the sort of scrappy nature of it. It is getting the like maybe literally cheapest MIDI controller on the market now and just making it microtonal friendly.
That's amazing. Now I also understand why you're using fewer screws, because if your keys are attached to a spine that goes at the top, then the screws just hold that down and you don't need all of them. Yeah, it's the same. Yeah, the same kind of stuff, like, because lots of keyboards, like my keyboard over there, it has so many screws in the back, and I only keep like 5 or 6 so that I can take it apart really quickly, because that's all you need on the outside, and it's not really undergoing a lot of strain, but it's really put together.
Yeah, you just keep them in little jars, and it makes it easier to swap. But yeah, that was pretty easy. You take it, and I think I recently made these little boxes.
Yeah, there's really something to be said for portability of these kinds of instruments. I actually am.
Oh, totally.
I have a new keyboard, and I'm not sure who I'm gonna sell the old one to yet, actually, just because it's so bulky. But I have one that's 88 keys, and it's as skinny as I can get it, so that like I can carry it to gigs, and it's not a huge bulky problem, and that kind of thing. But yeah, things evolve, so.
Totally. Yeah, what's nice about, I mean, while I was building this larger isomorphic instrument, I learned the process of 3D modeling to then learn the process of 3D printing and have a very cheap 3D printer. But what I enjoyed about stumbling into this area, which I never thought I would, and I don't know, I'm in it, I guess, apparently, but in this like 3D printing culture, when buying a cheap 3D printer, you then have access to tons of print files to modify your cheap 3D printer into something larger. I think especially with, I'm using an Ender Pro, Ender 3, if that's, or V2 or something. But with these Ender 3D printer models, there's an enormous subculture of people trying to like make it work a lot better. So with, I think, something like taking the cheapest MIDI controller on the market and then kind of modifying it in that sense, we already have cases for this made that like, so now like Symbolic Chromatico microtonal controller has its own case. It fits in a backpack. It doesn't require, it just has 2 like USB and sustain pedal, and it's good to go.
That's great. Yeah, you can take it on a plane even.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, so current plan is I'm wanting to share these. I mean, I will share the 3D print files and everyone can make them around. And if you don't have access to the 3D printer, I'm wanting to sell them now and I'm making little boxes. So then I'll throw a little screwdriver. So then you just use all of the screws on the original AKM 320. And then you would receive a little box of keys. And then you're good to go. And yeah, I think it becomes a pretty inviting way to jump into exploring 17 or 19 note scales immediately. Yeah.
That's literally so pretty. Like I almost even like that kind of box you're making reminds me of like I live in Indiana and the rich part of town is Carmel and they have all these like craft stores with little gifts and things and everything's all nice and they should like put these, with those and like
Yeah.
grab a microtonal keyboard on the way out, that kind of thing.
I've got friends who own a music store in Portland town, and I definitely plan to have a few there. I just
Yes.
like the novelty of like, oh yeah, modify my keyboard into a microtonal keyboard, and like in literally, what was this, 10 minutes if you have an electric screwdriver, it takes maybe 15 if you're doing that, but
Yeah.
pretty fun, pretty inviting. Yeah.
Not too extensive. Yeah. Okay, well, great. I'd love that we got to talk about these instruments. Should we investigate the harpsichord? Did you make effort to bring it here, and should we look at it?
Oh, sure, if you want to. Yeah, I can do a little camera action like this right now, which double manual harpsichord. Recently adopted it from the university that I'm at. It was, I think, I would say about like 30% working condition when I got it, and with about a week of my summer break and the help of like the 3D printing plectrums and getting some components working, I think I got it up and running. It's currently tuned to the outermost bars of my metallophone right now. As I already described, I have 24 outermost bars on the instrument that are bowable. I simply threw it on there, and that turns out to be 2 different chains of fifths. I can send more info on the scales, but as you have actual pitch, you'll hear like, oh, why did I choose those Cs? That's why. It's, I don't have C natural on this right now. You're hearing that, if you can hear that through. But yeah, it's pretty fun. It has, with it, it being a interesting creative parameter, to say the least. I get to play a bunch of fun, like, 7th clusters. I've got fun, 5-limit things, and then if I reach my hand, how do I do this? Playing 2 manuals across with one hand. Tilt it down a little.
Oh, sweet. Yes. Awesome.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So, getting to futz around with things on the harpsichord is really fun and good for your health. Yeah. It's great. Another, lovely toy that I haven't gotten to fully explore yet, but now I have all of these in my living room at one time, and I'm just trying to write the super monster chamber music that gets everything in use, and yeah.
Oh, that's
This
that's
is
the dream, isn't it?
definitely the newest in the collection, and I'm thrilled. We'll see when and if I get to, get to this, but because of maybe just at this point my nature of wanting to get under the hood and mess with things, would not be that hard to pop these out, create a new unifying 24-note keyboard system, and I think that would be really fun. So it's currently a little tricky. Also, notation becomes a little funny in that I'm not using, these manuals to do doubling unisons, of course, because I have independent across each string, but am into it and want to just solidify. Having my own sort of 24 note quasi archicembalo-ish instrument would be awesome.
I'm surprised I don't hear more often about people taking double manual harpsichords and turning them into something that has roughly 24 keys per octave. I've heard of Juhani Niravala doing that.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. I've seen and heard that too. I think, if I were to create the keyboard interface, that would be awesome to get to explore any full equal temperament less than or 24 and less, or subsets of them.
Yeah. I have one more crazy question
Sure.
about the cembalos, the mini-midis.
Yeah.
What? I know that you've got a 19-tone layout and you've got something mini going on. How many notes per octave do you think you could cram in there before it would be unreasonable to ask most people to play an octave?
Yeah, that is, well, I already took out the 19, and we'll just say, what a difference the 17 and 19 layout have for playability feel.
Yes.
The 19, admittedly, jumbo keys. These are kind of hilarious, and however, yes, it's not comfortable to play an octave with one hand, but for a already trained keyboard player, they at least know where it is immediately. And I think that's the real big perk or difference of this is knowing where you are in a new kind of area of having a diatonic keyboard. I have large hands, so I can play the octave comfortably, but it feels more like a tenth of sorts, when playing it. I think I've tried to look at 22, but also recognizing that these keyboards are, 32 notes entirely? You would get a little bit more than an octave with the 22 note layout. So something that I am really excited about, kind of taking inspiration from Vincentino's Archicembalo, is stacking these. So it's I think we're probably each a big fan of 34. If I got two 17s, it's MIDI controller costs $40, buy two of them, $80 investment, 3D printing, do that at your local library for hopefully less than $5. You have a 2-octave 34 note controller, and that's pretty cool.
I have never done the plunge into mini stuff, but I have looked around to see if people have modded their keyboards to give more than 88 notes. I did find one person who took apart everything and put it all together to make 128 so that he could have a note for every single MIDI note. And it, of course, was astronomically long, but they weren't doing anything microtonal at all, but they did manage to do that. So I think if we were clever, it also might be possible to take a certain number of keyboards with a certain number of items and put it into 88 or 128 or whatever in between portion seems acceptable, because definitely doing more than 88 with a non-mini is just so large horizontally. You're getting into sort of a point, I think, with anywhere around 100 where it's you have to reach all the way over there and it's becoming too large. But with the minis, I don't know, 128 could be reasonable for a person to sit and reach all the keys at once.
Totally. Yeah. We could do something this one's already apart, but thinking of them just side by side. Now with xenachord, I've fully taken out these circuit boards and I know them pretty well, but I could cut the plastic here and move the ribbon controller and create a new enclosure for them and make it a more unified thing. So now I'm just using two separate controllers to extend on, say, a 17-note layout or something. And then you have, 64 notes, and then you just think of it as modular in the horizontal sense. And so that's always an option for sure. It's just, I guess I am not going to design a circuit board. I think that there are, as we probably each have friends in the process of doing that. it's just very hard to beat the price of, well, this is like cheap Taiwanese keyboard, I believe. I don't know how I could do that for less. And within mind, boutique instruments, it's like they're priced high for a reason. As I get more and more into building my own instruments, I think I've had a couple of people ask, like, how much would I charge to build them a metallophone? And I'm like, just remembering like my bruised shoulder and the metal shards flying around. Like, how do you put a price tag on that? Yeah, it's totally.
Well, thanks so much for sharing your instruments, Richie. We really appreciate it. So what would be something you would want listeners of the podcast to know about the instruments, when they might potentially hit the shelves, how much they might be, etc.?
Yeah, for pricing, I'm wanting to keep things as like realistically affordable as possible, as I think it's pretty apparent. I fully encourage you 3D print your own and give it a try and let me know what it works and sounds like. And I think it'd be really fun to just see other colors too. You can print it in any design and have glow-in-the-dark sparkly things if you want, or a more traditional like white becomes the black keys, like my harpsichord kind of thing. Right now I'm imagining selling these boxes. I can't say for certain because I want to include shipping in the US, and I'm thinking around like $40 if I can. So you have $40 for the controller and $40 for the parts and a screwdriver, and then $80, and you have, a 19 or 17 note controller. I think it'd be way worth it for me to kind of build in a like, oh, if you want to buy both layouts or 2 of one layout, then I can give you a deal or something. Haven't hashed out logistics like that yet. It really comes down, I'm just printing things in my basement, so it takes time and sometimes babysitting, the spaghetti of print plastics. But I don't see it being kind of a forever business for me personally, and really more think of it as a practice that like we can all participate in xenachording your own device in this sense, and hope that it making it available to others, because like, wow, if this was available to me 8 years ago when I was starting to really commit to diving down in this, but didn't have a fixed pitched instrument, I think it would have just accelerated my passion for it all the more. And I started on the electric guitar with a very cheap electric guitar, and now I've got a 7-string kite guitar, and that's it makes sense to have kind of intro instruments and in that. Yeah,
I think it's sometimes it's too bad that people feel like they have to be extremely committed in order to participate. So hopefully this will lower some of those barriers. I think that's all the time we have today then.
Awesome. Yeah.
So great. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Steven.
It was a great time.
Yeah, I've been a huge fan. Again, just like nice full circle to reflect on listening to this podcast while making this instrument behind me however many years ago. And, good times. Definitely admire all that you bring to this community too. You've been so encouraging to me personally, and have witnessed that encouraging nature across so many different musicians interested in this field. So that's super awesome. Yeah. Just want to see other people explore sound in different ways too. So
absolutely. Where should people find you to talk about microtonality if they wanted to contact you?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, that's something that I didn't share. These instruments will be, and the build kits, and then already made instruments will be available for sale through my website, which is just richiegreene.com. That's RICHIEGREENE. However, I'm also, by that same Richie Greene is my Instagram handle, and is generally my handle about different social media platforms. You can reach out to me, through websites, through any social media outlet. I'm more often trying to keep an eye on Discord things in the xenharmonic Alliance Discord. Yeah, I think wherever you see me about, feel free to reach out. Currently living in Portland and teaching out here too, so yeah.
Great. All right, well, adios then, Richie. I'll see you later.
Cool. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Yeah,
have a good
bye-bye.
night. Bye-bye.
In addition to finding Richie on several pieces of social media, such as Discord, Facebook, and Instagram, you can also find the xenachord specifically on Richie's website at richiegreene.com/instruments. And you can follow xenachord on Instagram at xenachord, spelled at XENACHORD. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Now in Zen. I'm incredibly grateful to absolutely everyone who tunes in. A big thanks to our supporters on Patreon, our xenharmonic patrons, as well as our xenharmonic gods: June Dai Bates Kobushigawa, Naren Rattan, Mike Battaglia, Adam Freese, Matthew Sheeran, Hector McGuffin, Leland O. Weigel, Amy Coleman, Joe Weigel, and Tina Harmon Carto. Our next episode will feature Infinitone 2.